Hey folks, welcome to Ask Strong Towns Anything. So glad that you are here, as well as for those who are watching this afterwards. Thanks for taking a minute to explore what it is that Strong Towns members bring together as we grapple with some of the real challenges that we face in our communities, ask good questions about them, and then as best as we can, find good answers for them. We know that there is no single silver bullet that will solve our cities or correct every problem that ails us, because the reality is that much of this work is about cultivating health or guarding against things that create patterns of unhealthy behavior or unhealthy activities in our communities. This takes, for example, the approach of looking deep at the finances of our places, looking carefully at the values that are embedded in the streets and the ways that we treat them, taking a close look at what it means for us to actually honor the dignity of each person that lives in our community, and try then to create the conditions for everyone to live a good life in a prospering place. And so if you're watching this afterwards, or become a Strong Towns member, because that's how you get a seat at the table here, as well, submitting your questions to strongtowns.org/ASTA, or Ask Strong Towns Anything. So strongtowns.org/ASTA is the simplest and easiest way to then put questions on our radar. Coming up in the fall, we're going to be theming them to basically identify groups of different questions. But today is a reader mailbag episode again, and I'm excited for it. So welcome everybody that's rolling in. Jim Caruso, welcome. Glad you're here. I think you're a new face, so I'm glad that you've joined us for Ask Strong Towns Anything. We've got a bunch of others that are familiar, and I'm really glad that you've joined us for this. So we're going to dive in right away to the question that Jay has submitted. And then what I'll do is actually invite you, if you want, you can also just raise a hand, or midway through say, hey, I've got a related question or something totally different. If you came armed with a question, don't leave without having asked it. At the same time, if something is curious to you, definitely feel free to drop that in as well, because that might be of use to not only you, but to other people as well. And the last thing I'll note is be as active as you want in the chat. I liken it to a high school classroom where you're allowed to text. That's the exact same sort of feeling that you can have here, which does mean there is a way. If you see the chat going off and it's distracting you, if you select the little up arrow next to the chat, there's a box that says show chat previews. You can actually turn that off, and that will basically mute the chat, so that way the chat stays in the chat and doesn't come up on your screen. However, if you love banter, then you might want to keep that on, because that's always half the fun. Jay, I'm going to put your question on the screen here, but then what I'll also do is have you introduce it and maybe share just a little bit more about your question and sort of what caused this to germinate for you, on the idea that Strong Towns talk about activating our main streets, but how do we incubate small businesses, and what types of small businesses are still good options when one of the prevailing winds that a lot of our communities face is the fact that online shopping is happening, has really consumed whole industries, and kind of makes it more challenging for those small businesses to thrive. I'd love to have you weigh in, and then I'm going to put it over to Edward as well. Oh, apparently my ad block is working. Excellent. Jay.
Yeah, so I mean, I was actually got me thinking about this last night as I was going over to a local strip mall, and it was like, okay, well, yeah, the strip mall has the grocery store in it. I mean, it's a huge grocery store, and it's like, okay, but yeah, not everybody's going to start a small grocery store in their neighborhood, so those are going to be kind of regional, or not on necessarily on Main Street. They used to kind of be, but then kind of thinking about, okay, what other businesses are in the shopping center, and it was a lot of fast food places, a lot of things like that. And even so much of that has now gone to DoorDash, Uber Eats, whatever. And it's like, okay, well, if even those businesses are having problems surviving in a car-centric world, what is going to be left for a retail environment that would be able to thrive?
This comes up all over the place. It comes up in vibrant downtowns. It comes up in suburban strip malls. It comes up on the edge of town, coastal, mountainous, all over the place. No one person has figured out kind of this secret recipe. What we have seen at Strong Towns, the thing that is out there, because we're all of our businesses are in this highly competitive environment. So not only is it competitive within your town, Well, if you think about it, once you get in a car, it's just as convenient to drive 5 miles as it is to drive 15 miles. Uh, there's the convenience of Amazon, and Walmart now is getting in the game, and all of the online retailers coming through this stuff. The idea of kind of incubating those small businesses, we have to think smaller than what most of the apparatus that we have set up for coding retail or commercial businesses. And we have to think a lot differently. Our friend Monty Anderson with Neighborhood Evolution talks about nurturing and building up his future tenants. So Monty's been doing incredible work in the Dallas area in a couple of his projects. So if you go to Neighborhood Evolution, you follow their work, or you follow Monty Anderson on social media, you'll see him walking around places. He has this knack of finding the really rundown commercial centers, the ones that have the brands that no longer exist anymore, the ones that the roofs need completely replaced, that are oversized with the parking lot where all the asphalt's peeling up. And when he talks about nurturing that next level of tenant, the first thing he does is he goes and says, look, we're overparked. Let's go to the city and say, hey, we have all this parking. Nobody likes it. It looks ugly. Could we do something different? And he's worked really well at taking a bunch of parking spaces and changing the pavement color or putting gravel down or mulch down, and then inviting food trucks, tents, and vendors to show up. So he's nurturing that smallest scale of investor. And so he's in Texas. So he talks about, the woman that can make tamales, that can show up on the farmer's market on Saturday and Sunday. What could we do to activate the space so she could also show up on a Thursday? And what could we do to go and she could show up for 3 days out of the week at lunchtime? What are the types of things? So he goes to a lot of these parking lots and he creates these spaces, the outdoor plazas, to incubate that kind of farmer's market, food truck, that occasional vendor in those areas. So he provides that platform and gets people excited about those spaces. And it's Texas, so it's always warm and hot. So you're either going to be there in the summer in the evenings or in the winter during the day. Like you kind of like work through that environment. But lots of cities are doing this. The farmers market is a great start. The allowing other small businesses to emerge doing that. Monty describes those folks that he wants to be able to migrate somebody from a tent. If they can make money in a tent, then he wants to migrate them into the building. So imagine a dilapidated shopping center, getting those localized businesses. You're not going to get the national chains to show up for that. In the building, to make the numbers work within the building, none of those folks in their first brick and mortar location could take over 5,000 square feet, let alone 1,000 square feet. So creating micro spaces that those small businesses now can mature up into. So how do you get 300 square foot and 500 square foot spaces? From a landlord perspective, this is genius because you're able to actually get more per square foot, you get more activity. You have, instead of having one or two tenants, you have 30. So they're all on their social media, they have their client bases, and the person that comes for the tamales didn't realize that there's a t-shirt shop across the way. Didn't realize that there's this new soap business in there, and they start to build synergy off of each other. So building up in that. We've got to think smaller. We've also got to lower the bar of entry for a lot of this work. So in this example of working through what Monty's saying, providing the flexibility so we don't have to overpark it, providing the flexibility so that we can allow these small entrepreneurials to come in and allowing them to set up food trucks and be vendors in those spaces. Why is it happening in the strip shopping centers? It's because these areas are at the lowest value possible. They're easy to obtain. Still a big number, but somebody with experience in subdividing it up can actually begin to infill in those areas. The other example that we share a lot is Muskegon, Michigan. They have, I call them sheds. If I show them to you, you will say they're sheds. They call them chalets. So right off the bat, they've got the marketing down. But imagine a 100 square foot or 200 square foot cute looking building in vibrant colors. They lined a blank spot in their main street and nurtured entrepreneurial business there. The first year, they had one or two businesses that struggled. One of them was rollers. They sold skateboard wheels. So we can laugh about it. Like, how many skateboard wheels would you have to sell to feed your family? But they learned from that small mistake. So instead of the whole thing collapsing, it was that one little business. Uh, what they're doing is they actually partner with the Small Business Administration. In their community, the Small Business Administration has free coaching. All of your Small Business Administration offices that are nestled in all of our different communities offer this. They offer these coaching sessions where I have an idea. I want to open a coffee shop. I want to start a law practice. All of these things, you can go there and they will teach you how to be a business person, how to write a business plan, how to do a bank pitch. Through that, what they're doing is before you can apply to use to rent out one of these chalets in Muskegon, Michigan, you have to go to the Small Business Administration and do their training course. A little homework, but worth every penny of your time because it gets you a business model that now talks to other business people, talks to landlords, talks to the bank, starts to build that ecosystem of success. I'm sure if the skateboard wheel folks went there, they would tell you this is a great idea as a hobby, but might not actually survive as a long-term business. But by the way, there's these other things you could be thinking about if you're in that spectrum that, yeah, you could have the rack of the skateboard wheels, but here are the other things you'd have to have in that business to make it viable. And that would be part of the business plan. So lowering the bar of entry, thinking through the resources we have available in our communities today and nurturing that. Every community I go to, there are lots of entrepreneurs in the community. We shared the same stories in Chisholm, Minnesota. Chisholm had a very high bar of entry for people to get in. And because of that, all their ground floor, most of their businesses were the insurance agents and officey things. So you had shop fronts, big shop fronts, and somebody would just sit at a desk, like at a reception desk, and there'd be, the tax office was there with the areas to sit. Not an exciting downtown, but preserve the buildings. They had entrepreneurs in their community that were looking for space, but they couldn't afford 100 square feet. They needed 50 square feet. And in Chisholm, this came up in the wintertime when the shed shop wasn't open. So the Muskegon idea resonated with them, but they couldn't buy the sheds. They realized that in those empty shop fronts, they could actually create, because they were doing this for their Christmas festival, where they had artisans come in and craftspeople set up little booths inside. So Minnesota, cold, wintertime, let's go to the insurance agent. In their office, we're going to set up the nice little booth, feels Christmassy, shopping and energy going on. They brought that outside of the holidays. So they created those shop fronts. And we heard from the people that were like the receptionists, the greeters in these spaces, how fun it was that they were no longer alone on the main street. They actually had other people in the space. And again, like how Monty is nurturing up his future tenants. If somebody's coming, so in Chisholm, it started with hair braiding. So if I'm coming to do hair braiding, I've got my other kids, I've got other stuff going on. It builds a synergy where we start to fill out the downtown. We start to fill those pieces up. These are all small bottom-up approaches. And that's what I would get you thinking through in those spaces. When we nurture that, instead of having the one business, we could have 100 of these businesses. We can replicate it and replicate it at scale in all of our communities. So, yeah, Jay, if you had a location that you said, what could we do here? It'd be worth walking through. It'd be worth looking at analysis that Neighborhood Evolution is doing through their 12 steps to town making. It'd be interesting to look at Incremental Development Alliance and what it would take going through their pieces of creating this type of location. And what I've always found, we can do all the fancy market studies, but really getting on the ground and hearing in the neighborhood where the needs are and hearing who's doing the online businesses, who's doing the craft shows, who's creating the best, organic goat soap in the community, those sorts of things that are unique, working with them, you're going to hear about that stuff that they never could think that they could be in a brick and mortar location, but creating some of those business plans and lowering the bar of entry, maybe they could.
Mm-hmm. That's where I want to pick up, and then we'll go to you, Jay, as well, is just the idea of the shift. I'll drop it in the chat that Jim Gilmore and others have pointed out of like the movement from commodities, which are just like raw materials. Then you have goods, and goods are stuff that we still buy and sell online. That's a lot of like what our transaction with Amazon is just getting goods sent to our house. But then you move up a level and it's a service. So that might be your razor that gets sent to you every single month is a service, but it's not yet at the level of an experience unless the marketers really get their hooks into you. But that's where local businesses really have the opportunity to sell you the experience. It's I shook hands with the goat cheese guy and I still smell like manure, but like that brings me so close to like the milk and the experience and all of those things. And Jaime Izareta with the Storefront Renaissance League, I think is one of those key players in this to help people grapple with the idea that wherever you have a cluster of businesses that you want to thrive, that cluster needs to recognize they have a shared responsibility together. They are competitors maybe, but more crucially, they're actually necessary to make the cluster work. And that's where the distinction he draws is like all of your work when the customer is engaging with you, wherever they move, much of that should be clear. Are they on stage or off stage? So if there's stuff that you want to keep hidden, like actually work together to make sure it stays hidden. If you're sticking your garbage in front of somebody else's front door, like you're harming them, but you're actually harming yourself by degrading the experience. We see this with like shopkeepers that don't do anything with anything beyond their front door. You're like, how did it get to that point that you cared nothing for the public sidewalk, nothing for the public realm, and then gripe that people are not coming in? I'll illustrate this with one quick story with my local game store that I was willing to spend extra dollars on because it was like, oh, I'm supporting there were younger guys, they were doing game store stuff. And I was like, this matters. This is a virtual type of community center. We posted, we closed the street right in front of their area to create like a pop-up park, which is perfect for it. And they set up a big sign that said, day 17 of losing business to the pop-up park. And I was like, come on, seriously, because that's an opportunity that they missed where they could say there was an Indian store across the street. I said, what you should be doing is giving that Indian restaurant coupons that says, while you wait for your food, here's a 5% discount at the local Danish bakery. Like while you're waiting for your coffee to be finished or after you got your coffee, come into our store, browse while you're enjoying this. Like create those interconnections. And I'm persuaded that much of our local businesses, they will get together at things like a business association meeting and they'll gripe about the business improvement zone tax, but they actually are offshoring much of the responsibility to create the stage and make sure that the stage is cohesive and coherent when actually that it isn't asking that much of either owners and employees to do the small things so that when you step foot in that area, Donna, I think your area in Bloomington, for example, you've got highways running through both sides, but that doesn't mean, or highways, rapid speed roads, you have a situation where to get into the downtown is a little dicey, but once you're in it, man, it's sort of like when you show up at a play, like you might have had to scramble to find parking or whatever happened. But as soon as you get into the theater, you're like, I'm in my space. Like I get to go to my seat. They are welcoming me. What if our downtowns actually took on that approach, or not just downtowns, but business cluster areas? And I think this is related to a question that we got from Gary let me make sure I'm showing that properly. And then we'll come back to you, Jay. Actually, no. I'll pause. Jane, thoughts, reactions, rebuttals. Maybe the other part is no. Back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. No. And those actually the Muskegon one with the sheds / chalets or whatever they call them. It's funny because we'd actually kind of talked about pitching that to our town, San Antonio, with they're creating a new downtown entertainment district and stuff like that. And one of the things that we're really pushing for is that it'd be a lot more smaller business as opposed to a lot of these big, huge corporations coming in and doing all of their stuff down there. And so that's one of the things we've talked about pitching down there. And I had not realized that you could actually kind of make that work in an old strip mall type environment too. So
Yeah, if you just look, it's really easy when you start to walk around, and Monty's got a couple great examples, but you just make a beautiful promenade and you put the string lights up and that are in the barrels, and you put out tables that people can sit at. It's not hard to find folks to activate your space. There's always a band that will play outside. There's always food trucks available. And it's just a matter of thinking of that next, what is the next thing? Tents are really easy. If you want to add some structure, then you think about those sheds. And the folks in Muskegon have really figured that out. There's a lot of places around the country that are using it, but the Muskegon team, uh, they're now in I think their 8th year of doing that. And remember, 2 of those were COVID. The initial investment they made in those sheds, and they're only charging a few $100s for the rent on it. They yielded their return, their initial investment, in less than 5 years on that project. Not to mention all of the other economic benefits, but what the original dollars that they put in, they saw a return.
sounds good.
Norm, you're muted, which is a rarity. Norm,
His internet is down, perhaps.
I was gonna say, no, I think he's just muted.
yeah, Norm, you're muted.
There we go. Okay. The thing my wife wishes I had was a mute button. Saeed, you asked a great question, though, which is very related. So I think this is shaping up to be sort of small business plus commercial sort of opportunities within our communities. But as your city in Richmond Hill, Ontario, considers redeveloping a large area of the city or to be around, you said at the edge around municipal offices close to a business park, it's going to be mixed use, which often just means either stacked segregated uses or very segregated uses, very like clinical. We know exactly where everything is going to be as it is and always shall be. And as a consequence, they've only allocated a few blocks at the edge for commercial use. They're asking for public feedback on their 3 proposed designs. And you're asking why there? Why not help the downtown? And probably other questions that come up. Would love to, jump or throw this to anybody that's interested in picking up the question that you've asked here, because it's a really important one. How do you provide good feedback when the core of what they've proposed is off from what maybe we would otherwise want to see? Saeed, if your audio was working today, do you want to actually add anything more, or is that a pretty good way to summarize what you said?
No, you did a great job in summarizing that. And they have come up with 3 options. So they are asking, choose from this, different levels of density. And the people are focused on, no, this is too much density. We shouldn't bring too much, people into this area. But the main question is, why at the edge when we can spend much less money on the downtown? And we have a beautiful downtown, but it's been neglected. So I was wondering, because I'm new to this, so I was wondering, am I asking the right question, or there are other considerations that I'm not seeing?
One of the things is that water, to use an analogy, water will go where there's the least friction and where there's a downward slope. And the perception in a lot of this type of development is that the least amount of friction and sort of the trajectory will pick up is where you don't have to deal with the public. And so this is the concern that if they do anything in the downtown, it feels like you're just stirring up a hornet's nest. Whereas anything that you have large control of, you're only dealing with sort of an adjacent neighbor, which is a farmer, and another adjacent neighbor, which is an industrial tenant. That those people are easier to deal with because of this adversarial sort of consultation process where everything gets dragged out. And so this is why a lot of greenfield development gets approved, even though we all know it's actually not the thing that we should be doing to build up our communities. I definitely am sensitive to the idea that these municipal like business parks, or these business parks rather, do have within them the potential to become village centers. But most of the time that's not in the vision at all. And particularly if you're describing like the shops in any traditionally developed city are never at the edges or never at the perimeters. They're in the core. And even if there's some challenge of getting there, you might take you a bit of walking to get to the core. The idea is you cluster around a square, you cluster around key civic institutions in order to then create that sense of like familiarity. You create a sense of beauty, you create all of those other components, and that's how you get this. And instead, we are like, no, let's create a public or a private enclave. So a lot of housing developments will have private gardens right in the core, and then the resident or the commercial is sort of shunted to the edges. That can be a real challenge. And so asking, how can this be made more core? Do they have any intention in the long range plan for this to become its own village center? That would be one proposal, because then transit would be a logical sort of addition to that setup. But longer term, I think that there's you're asking really important questions of this. They are probably just saying, well, we have plans for this and we don't have plans for the other. So please comment on just this plan. I certainly have had the experience of providing public comment, and they're like, not public comment, but weighing in on forums where they're asking for feedback. And they're like, no, please stick to just this. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to talk about this other challenge. Edward, you're nodding. You've experienced this as well. Do you want to share further thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I actually had two different like reactions and directions that I would share. The first is when people are laying out these plans in this public process, and I dropped in the chat the article that public engagement is worth and worthless. Mm-hmm. Like somebody has hired a talented planning firm to develop a plan based off of all the market pieces. In Canada, your development process is a little bit different than we have in the States, but you have really talented people at City Hall that have gone to school and go to all the conferences to understand all the nuances of laying this stuff out. And then to think we're going to go to the lay people of a city and say, okay, here are your choices. You're going to get the number one on the menu, which is a Big Mac, the number two, which is a quarter pounder with cheese, or the fish sandwich. And like, as lay people, we're supposed to kind of like figure that out and lay that out. It's just a non-winning proposition, because most of the folks are looking at it and we've dispersed it out. When I would do consulting, we always put up 3 proposals because we wanted to have 3 targets to distribute out all the complaints, and then we'd funnel through and kind of leverage the one we wanted. That's a technique that's out there. So asking the public to set that out, you'll spend hours there, you'll do counter plans, all of that sort of stuff. And the sad thing is that it's really, maybe you'll get a better landscape buffer or a few smaller parking spaces, but you're still in the suburban trap. It's still something that is non-sustainable. So I always when my city council says, "Oh, come talk about our plan," I just don't find it the best use of my time as a citizen. What I would encourage is that let's look at the alternative and not draw an alternative plan. Let's look at an alternative approach. So in your community, where is the central location? Like identifying where that core area is. It could be the place that is, and I don't know your community that well, but the main street, the central park, the place that is the core area where a church or mosque is at. Maybe it is the the high school, any of those places, I would look at those places, and as citizens, I would start to show and describe those places and describe them in value and talk about the things you like about those places and elevate them. Um, you could do all of the types of things um, that you can see like in those areas. The as citizens to support those areas, we can promote them through check-ins on social media, sharing pictures of that on social media, showing about public comment, talking about those places. We can dive a little bit deeper. We can look at the return on investment on those places, the value they add. By doing that, by showing the places that we love, by elevating those businesses, by showing the actual return, humanizing it, showing the business owners that live in the neighborhood, that have a family that are there, showing how fun those places are, you're actually creating the alternative plan without drawing a thing. You're beginning to set up a platform that anything new that comes in has to be that or better. And it's going to be very hard to do something that is cherished in the community to try to create that out of thin air. Maybe with enough dollars that could happen. But frankly, in those areas that you start to outline, people will show up and say, "Oh, but there's this one thing. We could tackle trash, graffiti. We could tackle an individual vacant space. I don't know if your taxing is similar to what we saw in Medicine Hat. In Medicine Hat, if there's a vacant structure for it's like 2 or 3 years, they get a 50% deduction on their property tax. What we were able to help guide their economic development department is that in those areas, if they could just get a tenant into a space, they could just activate the space, even if it's not the big fancy restaurant they want, but just getting a retailer in there or getting somebody to do simple coffee drinks or a little pop-up bar. The amount of money that that generated in their tax base by stabilizing their tax base outperformed by thousands of the big industrial park on the edge of town. And it cost the municipality nothing because all the roads and pipes were there. So as you start to do the math, it takes many years to go get an industrial park. It actually probably just takes a couple conversations and a little walking discussion with folks to to take a vacant building and get it occupied with a business. And as you're generating that revenue, if there's things that you find that are barriers to it, we have the ability to, we now have the revenue coming in to help support that and bridge that. But yeah, the public engagement side, if you really read through that, the worth and worthless, the description of the bike pedestrian plan is similar to what they're asking you about this big development plan. And great, do what you need to do there, but your time would actually be better spent finding the real core downtown, the areas you truly love in your community, elevating those, showing the value to it, because you can create that parallel plan without drawing anything. And those will actually turn around and create enormous amounts of return on investment for your community for almost nothing.
And I think that's the core insight of Chuck's Old and Blighted Block article from way back when, is he said, at minimum, if we're going to introduce, what's the Swedish Mexican food restaurant in Taco John's? Yeah. He's like, at minimum, if Taco John's is going to be brought to the town with subsidy, it needs to outperform the old and blighted stuff. And when it's not, we actually have created a huge problem for ourselves. I want to pivot to a question that Warren has asked, which is a great one. Donna, I'm looking at you. We've got a few others that are especially politically involved. And I think this is something where confession time for me, when I worked in the mayor's office, part of my instructions were bury anything that would be controversial. And yet I think there was this willingness to engage with good faith discussions so long as they happen behind closed doors. So Warren, I would definitely say you can be of service to people that you want to help get reelected, or even people that you just want to not have the election get hijacked, by not necessarily making everything big, bold, public, but at the same time saying, let's have a good faith discussion. You can use phrases like, this is off the record, but I just want to understand, because municipal staff will get fired or not have any opportunity to get promoted if they cause problems for their directors. Their directors, likewise, will not get their contracts renewed or will not see their opportunity to become the city manager with the new council if there was any kind of a flare-up in their department during the run-up to the election. So already right now in my city, we are about 4 months away from making no big decisions. So right now, all of the developers are pushing to get all of their decisions in because they know that basically from January up until October of next year, there won't be a single significant decision made by our council, which raises questions about the usefulness of councils in these periods. It is interesting that you get elected to a 4-year term. Your first year, you're figuring out what to do. Your final year, you're not doing anything, which means that only in that 2-year window are you actually beginning to make things happen. I always say, picking a phrase from Lauren, she said, if it's raining, wear a raincoat. If it's raining, like, you have to just adapt. And I think that there is this tendency among some, and I see it sometimes come in comments like, oh, there's corruption because, this is just their way to stay in the game. The trouble that I believe most municipal elected officials are actually genuinely trying to avoid is the hijacking of elections to turn them into some completely torqued up debate of, can you believe those idiots that are currently in their seats? They're totally wrong. The staff are completely corrupt. I will go in and clean house. And say those people do get elected, all of a sudden they squeak. They're no longer roaring. They're squeaking like a mouse because the bodies are not in the closets, that the disaster is not so clear, and the reality of actually trying to bring about the change that they seek is much more challenging. I'll share just briefly, and then Edward, you've certainly had experience from this on, as a municipal staff member, is dealing with the folks up in Ottawa County in Michigan. There was a slate of people that were basically swept the county commission, and were all basically had gone like full on, like the New York Times and a few other pieces were like writing about the culture wars in Ottawa County. When I was visiting there, the residents were like, yeah, we wish there was no attention given to what was going on, because it was like scorched earth. Just, we're going to fire everybody. We know exactly where all this like skullduggery is going in. And then as soon as they were in, they did fire everybody. And then pretty quickly, all of their promised reports and unveilings and declarations that like nothing good has gone on, actually came to nothing. And so it is that challenge of getting, I would say, good relations during this time. If you look at it as like, well, even lame ducks need friends, that might be an opportunity to just try to sidle up and say, hey, I won't create any issues for you, unless you're planning to run in the election or directly endorse somebody that is stepping forward as a bold champion of this. One of the things I'll also mention too is drawing attention to Emma Durand-Wood, who is my sister-in-law, but she's running for city council in a by-election in Winnipeg. And one of the things that stood out to me is her platform just got released, and I'll share a link in a moment. But the first item of like, what is your approach? She said humility. And that humility is saying, like, I don't actually know that the full problem is understood. And therefore, she has opponents in the by-election that are promising to end housing affordability problems and to remove homelessness from the city and to basically do away with violent crime. I mean, that'd be great. But that's pamphleteering, that's sloganeering, and in contrast, I think Strongtown's advocates are developing the reputation of actually being sober, serious, and really reliable allies in saying, like, we need to change the conversation, but to do that means a lot of careful work together in our communities. Edward, reflect on this. Maybe you've got a different angle from your own perspective as well. And then Warren, love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, there are two things that you have to recognize with local government. One, they are so adverse to failure, they will do everything they can not to have failure. So having somebody complain about something in a community is failure. So they're going to do everything they can. They just are, it's just the way they're stuck on it. The other piece to it, as we think through this, is that there is this really thick bureaucratic process of getting stuff done. And as a result, there are no distinct leaders that come out of that process. So by complaining and hollering, it just doesn't do anything because all of our, at least in the States, all of our technical professionals are under all-out assault from keyboard warriors and public comment. They just are immune to all of it. If you see things that are not getting done in your neighborhood, there are two approaches I want you to think about. Um, it's not just because of the election cycle. I think one is we need to humbly observe, and that means that if we have to go out there and pick up the trash, if that means that we have to trim the trees or clean up the park as citizens, we should do that. We shouldn't rely on an elected official to fulfill that piece. Again, we can share what we're doing with that and lead by example without being negative to it. The other thing is do not be afraid to go get a cup of coffee with all of the elected officials, with people running and the people that are currently in office, and have those conversations with them. I will tell you, the elected officials that are in my community, I am in constant communication with them. It may not be public, but our kids go to the same schools. We have similar likes on social media, and we're sharing things, and I'm sharing my opinion and concerns with elected officials so they know that. But I'm not doing it out there at, at a big public event and belittling folks. I'm sharing where I'm frustrated and I'm asking how we can take action. I'm trying to reinforce with them since they're so averse to failure. How can I, as a citizen, elevate when they take a little bit of risk to elevate that type of work? We're always going to have elections. We're always going to have these pieces, but it may require us to kind of take a leadership role in it. When we do that, the folks that are going to take that great leadership as your next round of elected officials will be the ones that show up your next cleanup, will be the ones that show up in your community when they're knocking on doors and asking how they can help and elevate things forward. And that's what I'm seeing. Our local conversations, the ones that are seeing political shifts in communities, they are doing the work. And the municipalities are coming and following after that because our local conversations are testing the waters. So don't be afraid to do stuff.
Warren, what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, that's all good advice. I do try and shield the civil servants that are brave enough to talk with me, so that I don't hold them up to too much heat, because I know that it's risky for them to talk to me, and getting a foothold into the civil service is important, because the politicians are creatures of the public. They live and breathe public opinion, and I don't have a high or a low opinion of the politicians, because I know that they're all probably trying to do what they think is best, and they're being pulled in umpteen different directions. That's a job from hell. I don't envy that at all. Even the good ones are going to screw up every now and again, quite regularly, even because they can't avoid stepping on toes and making mistakes, and then that kind of a job. The difficulty is that I find that I can't mobilize my neighbors unless I'm open with them about the conversations that I'm having, and that I don't. That's exactly that's putting the civil servants and potentially ridiculing the public officials that I'm trying to help, so that they can solve the problems. In order to get my neighbors mobilized over an issue, I do have to talk about this in public, and so that's why it's always a guessing game of how much can I share without embarrassing the sources of my information. So I get the director of policy from the mayor's office now interested in emailing me, so I'm keeping it as a personal email rather than a public one. I'm no longer copying anybody else on the because I don't want to show him up or anything. And I'm hoping that that'll eventually turn into a more of an equal relationship rather than a public one.
So in the political, so part of the four-step process, Strong Towns, one of the toughest parts is to identify a local struggle. And when I say a local struggle, like the budget may be a local struggle or explaining that piece, but really getting down the struggle, either describing the contributing factor to the struggle or getting that struggle to a single sentence, like that elevator speech. If we can do that, that helps to become less offensive or defensive in our conversations. So is there something specific? Because there's lots of things we need to work in all of our cities. Is there something specific you see in your city that just isn't right, that needs attention that it's not getting?
Yeah, I started looking at the overall budget, but now I'm focusing on the infrastructure maintenance because they released a report last spring that showed that we're $10 billion in a gap between the revenue that we're expecting to have in the next decade and the cost of maintaining the existing assets. Yeah. So they're open enough to be able to tell us that we're $10 billion short over the next decade. So $1 billion
and you're
a year.
You're never gonna get 10 billion.
No, nobody's pretending that. So, but the only question is how much of that 10 billion can they get, and how are they going to get it, and how much is it going to cost to get it, and what is going to suffer as a result? I'm trying to elevate that conversation. So they were supposed to come out with a report in July on how that would be done. And we knew that it wouldn't be all 10 billion, but it would be some portion of it would be funded, and then the rest would be where. Now the elections come up, they're not going to release that report until after the election.
In your municipality, what is the annual revenue coming in? What's your budget?
About $1 billion.
Yeah. So if you were to take all the revenue today that you have in the city and dedicate it to infrastructure,
still wouldn't be enough.
Yeah. So let's break it down a little bit more, because what that identifies is a problem that nobody can solve. So of course, the elected officials are going to run to the hills. They're going to say no comment. They're going to distract. When you look at all of your technical staff at City Hall, the finance officers, it's just such a hole that they're in that they can't deal with it. There's no way to plug that in. But let's go through and look at in the city. And this is what, as I've talked to public works directors, in the budget, it says we need to repave roads like every 25 or 30 years. Somewhere in your budget, there'll be a note. And that is resulting then in this $1 billion number that's coming out. But in many of your cities, there are things we're doing that extend the life pavement of a road. Maybe it's not getting all of the freeway traffic because it's a residential street. Maybe we've done some crack seal on it, or we had a better mix of asphalt that's going to last longer than what we thought. But there are probably areas in your city where there are significant infrastructure issues. Mm-hmm. So identifying where is the one street that there are a lot of potholes that's unsightly and dangerous and people don't drive on anymore. If we start to go through the budget, we're not going to get the $1 billion. We're not even going to get 100 million. We'll be lucky to get $1 million. But where is a street that we
just mapped that? We just had a graphics wizard take a look at the pavement quality index for the whole city, and he mapped it to try and find out where that one street was. Turns out it's every street except the new suburbs.
Which again is like that. You should be elevating how ridiculous that is.
Yeah,
that is something coming from the engineers that want it's probably from the company that's going to sell you the asphalt. what I would do is identify, like, we can't fix it all. So trying to narrow down where is the one street that really is beyond all the others. And let's talk about the strategies we could have on that one street to make the repairs or do the maintenance with the resources available. So some of the things that become creative on it is walking, doing a walking audit. Let's get people out to look at this street. Is it really that bad? When we look at what the computer told us and the engineers telling us the asphalt, are all the streets equal? Where's the one that's really the worst? And let's figure out some things as citizens that are high priority to us, like the really deep potholes, or it's unsightly, or it's the main street. Maybe it's the one we're going to have our next holiday parade or festival on. And then when we look at the street, we start asking things on it. Okay, we could replace it all as it is today, but is it too wide? Is it overbuilt? Are there places that we can use less asphalt? So in the last jurisdiction I worked in, we didn't have enough money to repave all of our roads. And even if we did a little bit every year, we'd still be 50 years behind. But we started to get more creative with public works and we said, look, on all of the streets, we have identified an engineering standard that 20 feet of pavement on a street is enough for all the cars to get down and all the fire trucks and all the things we need to do. So in years past where we may have done 34 feet of pavement, we're only going to mill and repave 20 feet on every road within the city. If we need to do more, we're going to look at that in a more detailed approach. Just doing that doubled the amount of lane miles we could do in our city. So that was a thing of like working through where's the worst road, what are our constraints, and let's start to tackle it that way. So I would find the one worst street, and in all of the discussions as you're meeting with the elected officials and staff, I just say, look, we all have to agree, and I need to work as a citizen to help people realize that this is an insurmountable struggle. We're not going to get $1 billion. Not every street is equally bad in our city. We really need to be asking harder questions. And once we find the worst street, the one with the worst damage, the one that has to get the pipes or drainage fixed underneath it, let's look at that street. And when we build that back, how can we build that in the most responsible way? That would be the constructive discussion I would encourage you to have with the community, because very rarely do residents and advocacy groups ask for less. You're asking for better, and as a result, it's actually probably going to be less. And if it's less, it's also probably something that is going to be more affordable within the resources that you have. And that starts a completely different conversation that might open more doors.
I really appreciate that. That's good stuff. Let's now come up to the top of the hour, but we're going to take a quick look at this intersection in Sturgeon Bay. Let's just make sure that I'm showing that right. So, and I dropped a link in the chat as well. In fact, I can make this full screen so that way we can see just a little bit better. So this is 5th and Jefferson. Chesley has asked a question about it. The thing that's, and it was because of the requirements for a four-way stop to be introduced here, rather than because it technically is a state highway, if I'm remembering this correctly. The first thing that stands out to me is I don't know that a four-way stop is necessary. Now, I'm not a traffic engineer. However, there are core things that are definitely doable at this site, which is the first one is a curb bump out. No one is allowed to park there. This fire hydrant certainly should be protected. And so the question is there anything that could be done to basically narrow that travel lane, as we see in so many other types of applications, so that there would be clarity in that site? The likelihood of cross traffic getting into collisions doesn't necessarily reduce simply by removing that in the way that a four-way stop might. However, what it does do is it definitely would narrow that roadway. It would improve the crossing ability for a person that's just walking across, and connected to it begin to help. This is lovely what they've done here. But the curiosity is why, when they were repaving or repouring all of that concrete, didn't they simply bring that out? We know that curb bulbs or bump outs work. And so that would be some of the first elements there. And I can see one of the culprits for why a curb bump out in the mind of an engineer doesn't work, and that would be this drain. But the simple solution is to leave the curb or the drain as is, and you leave a channel on both sides for that curb drain to still work functionally, but at the same time to be used for that. I noticed that Chesa, you do have audio today. So do you want to? But I notice you're unmuted, but I haven't heard from you. So if you're not able to, maybe drop it in the chat. But Edward, you also do this even more regularly than I do. As we grapple with this question and look at just the intersection as it is, I actually expected from the description that it would be a bigger road, and this is actually a much more modest roadscape, which makes the likelihood of being able to improve it significant. What are some of the things that stand out to you there, Edward?
Yeah, I would ask lots and lots of questions, and I would bring people out to this particular intersection and walk at it. That if we start to shift the way that we think about the questions here. So right now, all the engineers are thinking through speed, what's the posted speed, or what is the capacity of this roadway? And by increasing capacity, by adjusting capacity or speed, we then could look at cost and safety. As citizens, when we look at this, what happens if we switch and we ask about safety first? How can we make this a safer intersection? I look at it, the crosswalks aren't quite right. They don't quite meet pro-ag. There's some drainage. There's utility components there. There's some on-street parking, some daylighting issues. It's a very long street, so I can see things where drivers would want to drive fast on it. Mm-hmm. So some of the different pieces to it of really looking at this intersection and walking through it. Now, there's all of these fire and ice discussions that come out of it. So where do the snowplows go? When they push snow on the street, how do we do these things? When there's fire trucks, how do fire trucks get around these intersections? We can simply look at that today in a nice, before winter hits, before there's a fire, we could actually go out there with orange cones, the ones the police department use for your festivals, and put them out there. And there's a technical term called daylighting, which basically says at the intersection, that first parking stall, you don't park a car so you can see a pedestrian out there. So narrowing, right-sizing that street up in those areas. There's lots of curb features you can do that allow snowplows to move through. I myself was initiated in snow removal. My first experience at my last job, they threw me behind a snowplow because we had a big blizzard, and I got to work with the crews and figure out how they operate. Every snow removal crew I've ever met are incredible individuals, and they have all the equipment they need to do this type of work. This is not foreign to them. Curb extensions probably exist in other places in your community. So looking at that, we can train for those pieces. But if I look at safety at this, how do we shorten the crossing for the pedestrians? How do we raise awareness of a driver that this is a street and not a road? How do we, if we were to do a speed study out here, how do we go and speed it? How do we get the design so that the cars drive the appropriate speed? Those are all the things I would do. And then I would experiment with cones and paint. Get the fire trucks out there to turn. I assure you they'll be able to make all the turns. If they don't, we'll push the cones back and test those pieces out. But yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to do more of a deep dive on it. I have been looking at Sturgeon Bay since you first started sharing some of the comments. I will tell you all that are here, I did some sketches and some videos that are upcoming. So I'm hoping to get lots of clicks. The purpose of that is not to come up with a solution of stop signs or no stop signs or curb extensions or no curb extensions. It's about thinking through this particular intersection. And I found that if I get people out in the field, that the power of the walking audit and just experiencing it, and we ask folks, how can we make this safer? And we put safety as our top priority, the outputs are completely different. And when we look at engineering drawings and aerial photographs, that is kind of like learning Latin and Greek. But if I go out in the field and we walk around it and we stick some posts up and we do stuff, I'm amazed every time we go out and I see people do the technical urbanism and the temporary pilot projects. When they put cones up and they put chalk lines up, the immediate public input from that you get, because you see that pedestrians show up, people drive the right speed, you start to see people stop where they're supposed to stop. All the things happen, and if they don't, we just adjust until we get there. Those exercises, that time, when we talk about the public engagement process, what you would buy in cones and temporary bollards is about what you would pay for postage and putting a notice in the paper that you're having a public meeting to talk about this at City Hall. And you're lucky if you get a dozen people that show up. They're usually not the people from the neighborhood who ever drive this. They're the people that show up for public meetings that have the time to show up on Tuesday at 7 o'clock at City Hall. But if you do this in the street and you test it out, all of a sudden, all the people that drive this every day experience it. The residents can see it. It's less of an unknown. It becomes tangible for them. And if they don't like it, if they're a resident that has a concern about it, we can test it, observe it, adjust it. It's funny when you give somebody a yellow vest or a cone and tell them to place it, the power you give them at that moment. And all of a sudden they're bought in. Now they're participating in that. So happy to go through these because I know this is something I saw all the time working in local government. How do we do it? This is that kind of thought process of walking through this is what at Strong Towns we've described as a street design team. How do we go out there and work as a team collaboratively with both technical experts and local experts to envision this area and talk about it and work through that type of intersection? That's what a street team would do. And it sounds like you're making some headway, and I would love to continue to nurture that in Sturgeon Bay because for me, this looks like an easy intersection with design. It's probably a tough getting through and shifting the conversation with public works and with city staff and with local residents. And that's where I think some of these other tools can help shift that conversation.
Awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour. We have covered a whole lot of terrain today, and so I'm really grateful for that. I'm glad to be able to do this together. Just a quick note again that the Fall Locomotive Series is about to get started, and that is now available for all of our members for free. I've included in the chat a link that takes you right to the checkout page. That's Thursdays. I can't remember the time. I think it's 1 o'clock. I'm bad with dates, times, all of that sort of stuff. So don't trust me, trust the internet. But that is coming up very soon here. And then just a quick note as well, we are running another round of the accelerator, which is going to be focused on a really intensive work through of the primary Strong Towns book that Chuck has written. That's Chuck and Edward and others that participate, including coaching calls. That's available especially for technical professionals, for city elected leaders, those that really want to sort of hone their craft and maybe develop their instincts as well. And then the other thing that's a little more on the social, I don't want to undersell it. It's more on the social side, but more on the idea of building up human capacity is the Strong Towns cohort, and those applications are available up until September. And the cohort is like a leadership group that is working together, meeting together regularly, and I think once a month, and taking opportunities then to culminate in gathering together at the national gathering and being able to share the struggles that they experience, and then be able to like workshop how do how do you grapple with these things? How do you address these things? Kind of like what we get to do at Ask Strong Tens Anything, just in a more structured format. So with that, thank you so much for being part of what we're doing, being a member, being a part of the constant questioning, but also striving for shared answers together in what we can do to make our communities healthier and stronger. So have a great day, everybody. Keep doing what you can to build strong towns.